I think people hear what I say sometimes and they think what I'm saying is, well, if you're overweight, it's your fault. I will say I used to have that perspective, right? I used to have the perspective that if if you gain too much body fat, you're just lazy, right? I no longer have that perspective. I do think that there is personal responsibility, but there's also a lot of things that go into obesity. And we know, for example, people who are obese or obese prone, that they have a much greater reward sensation from food than a lean person does. And there was actually one thing that really blew my mind is I think they had a survey of 100 obese women, and over 50% of them had some sort of sexual assault trauma in their life. And many of them identified that, and they said, I became big, like almost so like I wasn't, so somebody wouldn't look
so
at
I'm
me
not
and find me
attractive. Yes.
Or I felt like I had some protection, that sort of thing. Or food was a coping mechanism for them, right? So it's like, yeah, obesity is an energy imbalance.
And there's many medications also. Like I remember getting into, back when I was stupid and I would get into like Instagram comment wars with people. Someone was like, would you ever hire an overweight trainer? And I would say, of course I would. I have no idea what thyroid medication they're on, what SSR, like if they're on an SSR, like all of these things can alter metabolism in people. And I think that my comment was something like, as long as I see that they're making, like they're working out, and like, it doesn't matter to me. What I care about when I hire a coach is that they're going to give me my time back, that they're going to shorten my learning curve in an area of expertise that I am not an expert in. That's why I'm hiring them. Do I care what they look like? I mean, maybe when you think about personal training, maybe that's what you might like if they can do it for their body, but that's an N of one. Maybe they're dealing with some other thing that you are not privy to. Again, that's kind of like, maybe that's an extreme example again, but
I mean, I'll take that a step further with say, what about this person? As I said, if we're going to go down that road, then just find Mr. Olympia and have him tell you what to do. Because obviously he must be the most knowledgeable person in the world because he has the highest ratio of lean mass to fat mass, right?
Yeah.
So no.
And like doctors, notoriously the worst patients. The number one reason why chiropractors retire from practice is back pain, because we're hunched over people all day long and we don't get our treatment. So it's like, does that make them a bad chiropractor? Well, I mean, maybe the behaviors, like they could have changed their behaviors, but to your point, like, well, why don't we just speak to like the one person, the one descending voice, Mr. Olympia or whoever? It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think when we look at some of the best coaches in sports, actually, most of them weren't great players. It's very rare that a great player becomes a great coach.
Yeah.
Most of the best coaches were average players at best. Now, why is that? Well, usually it's because they had to study so much to milk every ounce of skill that they had. Whereas somebody who it just comes naturally to them, I've seen this as a competitive power lifter. I have pretty long legs, and squats were something that took a lot of time and honing of a craft in order for me to get comfortable with. And I can remember being in the gym in high school, and I would kind of squat leaning forward. And this guy who was like 5'6" with femurs about this long was like, well, just squat more upright. And it's like, dude, the bar has to stay over my midfoot and my femurs are this long. Like, I have to lean forward. There's nothing else I can do here, right? Give me all the dorsiflexion you want. I'm still going to lean forward. But for people with, it just comes naturally to them. They just they don't really know how to coach you because they've never really had to really work themselves into figuring that sort of thing out. So you're absolutely right. A lot of times the best coaches are actually people who weren't even that good at whatever they were trying to do. In fact, every powerlifting coach I've ever had, I have been much stronger than all of them, right? So why wasn't I just coaching them? Well, because they know what they're doing, and I'm not an idiot, but especially when it comes to my own progress, I'm an idiot, like most people, because it's so easy for us to tell somebody, hey, you should do this, 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 this. My wife and I talk about this all the time because she has a master's in dietetics. Well, one of the phrases I'll use a lot with her is, what would you tell yourself right now? And she'll usually look at me like, but
damn it.
It's so true, right? Like, because as individuals, we are subject to our own emotional and biases, where it is nice to have that kind of outside perspective of somebody who's not emotionally invested.
Yeah. All coaches need coaches. I always have people that are coaching always, all the time, because just as you said, I used to do this in practice all the time. And when I was in a physical practice, like, you know what you need to do? You need to rehab. You know what you need to do? You need to meditate. Meanwhile, all the time, I needed to do those things as well. I needed to be doing my rehab. I need to be doing my meditation, et cetera. I want to come back to protein and like, this is such a juicy conversation, but I want to also talk about protein and carbohydrates too. And I'm thinking this might bridge our discussion into Fitnesslandia. Because I think at least for sure with carbohydrates, but also with protein, at least on a weekly basis, I'm having someone say, but I'm concerned if I have a high protein diet, because there's certain protocols that I like and I'll kind of, state my biases. I do like a low carbohydrate diet initially as a therapeutic intervention. And then I want you to get off of that. And then I kind of sort of move people typically to a higher protein, higher carbohydrate composition. And then I talk about cycling for women as well, which we might get to today. But the protein piece is, what about my kidneys? And the carb piece is, aren't I going to get fat? Like, you put me on this like ketogenic diet initially, and now I'm going to start eating carbs again. Aren't I going to get fat? So let's start with protein, because I think people get it wrong. And I want to talk about it in the context of muscle protein synthesis. I know this was part of your studying when you were doing your degree. How much protein? So my first question, then we can kind of unpack it a little bit. How much protein do we need to maximize muscle protein synthesis, and specifically the leucine content that we need in order to be able to achieve that?
So, great question. I'm really glad you added the context of to maximize muscle protein synthesis, because the word need gets thrown around a lot. And I'll always say, we only need like 50 grams a day, but need means your bare essential minimum, right? So, what is the context? If we're talking about what's useful for health and, muscle mass, that's a very different question than what we need to just exist. So this is actually right up the alley of what I did. Now, most of my research was in rodents, but it was later validated in humans. And what we see is that, one, you touched on it, leucine content of the diet tends to be the most direct predictor of the muscle protein synthetic response to a meal. So in humans, it's about 2 to 3 grams of leucine in a meal will maximize muscle protein synthesis. Now, it probably depends on various factors like genetics, your existing lean body mass, and possibly some other factors that we haven't identified.
Age. Yeah.
Yeah. Age. Yes. Yeah. There is some anabolic resistance as you age, where you need a comparably larger amount of leucine to get the same anabolic response as somebody who's young. So that's a great point. But for most people, 3 grams is going to do it. So what does that look like in terms of protein sources? Well, if we're talking about something like whey protein, which can be, up to like a 12% leucine, 20, 25 grams might do the trick. But if we're talking about something like wheat gluten, which most people don't supplement with, but actually collagen. Let's take collagen.
Let's use collagen. Yes, yeah, good.
That's a very, very poor source of leucine. I want to say it's under 5% leucine. So you might be looking at like 60, 70 grams of collagen to maximize muscle protein synthesis. Now, there's some evidence that collagen may have some other benefits, but I'll tell people in terms of anabolism, terrible for muscle protein synthesis. Then if you look at things like, like wheat, I kind of brought up, that's about 7% leucine. So you need like, 30, 40 grams. Soy is about 8%, tends to be one of the better sources of like vegan, like protein. That's about 8%. Most meats are like 8.5%. And then eggs are 9, whey's like 11 or 12. So, Now, that being said, and I want to really point that out, that doesn't mean that you can't get enough protein from some of these lower quality sources to maximize muscle protein synthesis. You just need more of it to do so. So again, I'll tell people, for the most part, if you're getting a high amount of protein on a daily basis, I wouldn't get too wrapped up in like, well, I've got to have whey protein at every single meal. And, like if you're eating, around that 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, you're going to be fine for the most part. The one caveat I'll say is if you're somebody who's like a complete vegan, you're probably going to have to supplement with some isolated protein source, because for a couple different reasons. One, we've already kind of discussed, like vegan sources of protein are lower in leucine. So if you want to maximize anabolism, it's going to be tough. Then the other factor to that is usually that plant protein is bound up with fiber and is less digestible and bioavailable. So not only is the lower amount of leucine, you're getting less of it. There's also some data that suggests the liver tends to sequester plant protein a little bit more, and like not as much of it reaches the bloodstream compared to animal protein. And then the other problem becomes you're getting usually a pretty large amount of carbohydrate or fat along with that protein source in terms of an intact protein. Now, again, I'm not trying to dog on vegan diets, because you can build plenty of muscle on a vegan diet, but for most people, that's usually going to look like supplementing with some kind of isolated protein powder. So as long as somebody's okay with that, I'll tell them, you can, build muscle or build a lot of muscle on a vegan diet. It just takes a little bit more planning and a little bit more mindfulness in terms of how you're doing it.
And caloric, like you're going to, by definition, be taking in more calories as well.
It can be, as like I said, if you want to keep the calories down, you're probably going to have to use quite a bit of an isolated protein, just to get into like a soy isolate or something like that. So, it is possible to do, but obviously consuming animal products makes it much easier. But if somebody's like a pescatarian or a lacto-ovo, that's very easy, because all of those are very high quality protein sources.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've always asked that. What about vegetarians and vegans? Like you can totally get there with plants, but you have to be mindful of the calories, especially if in the context of our just previous conversation around calories in, calories out. If you're looking for recomping, if you're looking to increase your muscle mass, your your muscle mass specifically, and also reduce adiposity, then the calories there are going to get potentially a little messy anyway.
Yeah. And you did bring up, wasn't protein going to harm my kidneys? So I want to be very, very clear on this. There is none, zilch, no evidence that high protein diets harm a healthy kidney, right? So there was actually a recent meta-analysis of randomized control trials by Dr. Stuart Phillips, who's probably the foremost expert in protein metabolism in the world, and just showed that there's just no evidence to support that claim. Now, where this came from is the idea is, protein, excess protein has a nitrogen component, and you have to eliminate that because ammonia is toxic in the blood. So now you don't have ammonia just floating around in the blood. Your body converts it to urea, but then the thought was, well, that urea has to be eliminated through the kidneys, and so that must put strain on the kidneys. Well, now we know that doesn't appear to be the case. And even, I will say, the research is pretty muddy about whether or not low protein diets actually help delay kidney disease too. There was a recent cohort study. I think they were looking at mortality rates in people with different intakes of protein who were in different stages of renal failure. And they just didn't really see much, if any, of a protective effect of low protein diets. Now, full disclosure, I'm not a renal expert. I'm not saying for people to go out and eat a high protein diet if they have kidney disease. What I will say is the evidence is much more muddy than people tend to make it out to be.